Hey friends, tonight we'll walk right through the heart of the questions Salem could not answer. A thin frost clings to fence rails and window panes, and the village breathes in the hush before dawn. A world of wood smoke, wool, and whispering eaves. Before we begin, please like and subscribe, only if this truly helps you unwind. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, lie back and get comfortable. Let's begin tonight's story. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to our tale of Were They Really Witches? The questions Salem couldn't answer. Chapter 1. Whispers in a winter kitchen. The winter of 1692 arrived like a held breath. And so the houses of Salem village gathered their heat close, banking it in hearthstones and iron kettles, in quilts patched with careful hands, in prayers said over bread dough as it rose in the dim light. The lanes were packed with crusted snow, and the ponds wore a glassy hush. Beneath the lantern's quiet, you could hear oxen shift in their stalls, and the faint rasp of pine boughs against clapboard walls. And inside one house, where the floorboards had been scrubbed with lye until they gleamed pale as a moonflower, two girls began to tremble. They were young, and winter makes all children restless, and yet what came upon them did not feel like restlessness to the adults. A hand would jerk, a shoulder would twitch, a cry would flutter loose, and then lodge again, as if the voice itself had snagged on something invisible. A spoon slipped from fingers and clattered on the boards. A prayer was started and then stopped, as though the words had turned to smoke in the mouth. When the older men asked what afflicted them, the girls could not say, only that a burning ran through their limbs, and a swarm of pins pricked at their skin. And figures came in the night that did not cross the threshold and yet were unmistakably inside. A physician would be fetched, trudging through the cold with his leather bag, and he would listen gravely and watch carefully and test for fevers and humours and the signs that a world of learned books had taught him to recognize. He would find little he could name, and when a learned man cannot name a thing, he reaches for a mystery to hold it still. The village would soon be told that this was maleficium, that old Latin word that felt bitter on the tongue, meaning an evil craft, a warping of God's ordinary weave by hands in league with darkness. But the kitchen where it began was not a place of darkness. It was a place of stew, steam, and tallow light, of wooden trenches and stale crusts softened in broths, of a child's laughter that often ran like a bell through the rafters. In that kitchen, stories were told to pass the long hours. Tales of islands where the seas glowed like coals at night, of spirits that walked at the edges of the forest, of charms that trapped bad luck like flies beneath a glass. In that kitchen, the world felt larger than the village, larger than Massachusetts, larger even than the great and creaking Atlantic, whose winds had blown so many of these families here. And so we arrive at one of Salem's first questions, quiet and persistent as snow against a door. How does a story become a snare? In the hush around the hearth, a woman from far away, her tongue shaped by islands and salt and a life not chosen, told tales the children asked for again and again. She mixed dough and stories, and sometimes she traced signs in flour, an old reflex of memory, a way to keep harm at bay. Perhaps she acted a scene the way a storyteller does, a shadow puppet against the hearth's glow. Perhaps the girls leaned close and loved the thrill. What a tale gives, in winter especially, is warmth and a little lightning. But the same tale, retold under fear, can be made into a blade. In Salem village, that fear had been building for years. Land boundaries knotted neighbors into quiet animosity. A quarrel over pasture could sour a Sabbath greeting for a decade. The meeting house rang each week with sermons about the devil's restless watch. And beyond the village, the frontier groaned with war. Families arrived carrying grief like a second skin, refugees from raids and fires in the north, bringing with them news of night assaults and fields left blackened. The world felt tilted, and when the world tilts, people reach for explanations that can bear the weight of their dread. The girls' afflictions multiplied. They cried that a spectre pinched them. They barked like dogs at prayer. They curled and arched as if their bodies were ropes pulled by unseen hands. And another question drifted up from the floorboards and settled in the rafters. What do we see when we say we see? In a village that taught that matter and spirit commingle, that angels and devils glance across the same thresholds as men, a vision was not dismissed as fantasy. It demanded the solemn attention one might give to smoke that hints at fire. The girls described faces. They named names. The air in the meeting house thickened with certainty. And yet, if we step gently into that room with them, in our mind's eye, and sit by the hearth and watch the light pool on the rough table, we might notice other currents running beneath. The minister's household was under strain. Parish politics cut like a thin wire. Factions had formed, as they do in all human gatherings, and the girls lived at the intersection of expectations and discontent. They were loved, surely, but also watched, woven into a net of grown-up quarrels they could not untangle. Children in such nets often tug whatever chords are within reach. Their bodies become instruments playing unheard songs. When the physician's verdict named the devil's hand, the village had a path laid before it, one trodden in Europe and carried to New England in books and sermons. And so comes a further question, slow and sobering. How does a book become a bridge? Learned works on invisible warfare, published by grave men with reputations as sturdy as oaks, lay on desks and shelves. Ministers quoted ministers. Marginal notes became sermons. Sermons became habits. In those books, there was a careful law of evidence that sometimes wavered on spectral ground, and in those pages, the devil's craft was made plausible through analogy, precedent, and the gravity of print. Paper gave shape to fear. Ink hardened it. When accusations began first, a woman easy to suspect in a hard land, then another whose tongue had cut more than one neighbor. Then the storyteller from the kitchen, the valley's winter, grew sharper. One woman had long been whispered about, living on the border of respectability and want. Another was known for a temper and a businesswoman's edge that could prick the pride of men. The third carried the marks of difference in her very skin and speech, and bore the most fragile status any person can hold. She was property before she was a person, and so her voice in that room was the faintest and the easiest to bend. And here the numberless questions swarm like snowflakes, no two exactly alike. What counts as speech when you are not permitted a full voice? What shape does truth wear when it must pass through fear? What does confession mean if the silence around you is already a verdict? The records that survive will insist on their own clarity. Names, dates, depositions framed by tidy lines. But beneath the clerk's careful hand, there is always a flicker where the human heat burns through hesitations, revisions, words that seem to rise from the page like breath on cold glass. The village gathered to watch the examinations. In a chair at the front, an accused woman faced her accusers. She denied, she protested, she sighed, and she stood silent. The afflicted fell into fits, and the room throbbed with a rhythm as old as theatre and as modern as the courtroom. A rhythm that made men in wigs lean forward and fear that if they did not act, a worse chaos would slip its leash. And so a judicial question entered the winter with all the chill of the sea wind. What may a court count as proof when the thing itself is unseeable? If the devil can make a spectre appear as anyone, how can any witness stand? Yet if the devil is at war, how can a godly court not answer the trumpet? In the hush between these contradictions, men made policies. A magistrate's hand sketched his signature in the place it always went. A sheriff's boot scraped the threshold. The neighbors murmured. The weight of ordinary habit is often heavier than any single passion, and so people did what people do. They nodded to the person with the strongest title. They checked their faces for any betraying smile. They repeated what seemed to be the safest sentence in the room. The winter went on. The girls continued to see what they said they saw. And yet, beneath all of this, there were quiet emotions, like the hidden currents under the ice in a pond. The village was not a single thing. Some doubted from the start, and their doubts were a kind of blanket folded away in the chest, perhaps to be taken out later when it could warm someone without burning them first. Others believed earnestly, with the fervor of people who had suffered real blows, illnesses that cut down the young, barns burned by unseen hands, failing crops, stray rumors of midnight meetings in the forest that shivered all the way down the spine. In such weather of the soul, belief is a kind of shelter. The question of truth becomes indistinguishable from the question of safety. So, were they really witches? The question is a lantern we carry backward through the snow. It lights certain drifts and makes others darker by contrast. In the kitchen where this began, dough still needs kneading, wood still needs splitting, and the morning chores do not cancel themselves because fear has come to roost. The storyteller still knows her island's lullabies. The girls still crave attention and warmth. The minister still wrestles with his ledgers and his sermons, and the black dog of worry that sits, patient, by the study door. And the village still meets each Sabbath, each face a lit candle of its own concerns. At night, the pines lean close. The old paths to the meadows grow hard and glittering. And in the homes where suspicion has now taken a chair at the table, families bow their heads and say grace in careful voices, watching one another's hands. A mother folds a shawl over her daughter's shoulders and feels, not for the first time, how fragile flesh is, how easily we bruise each other in our certainty. A father checks the latch twice. On a bed by the hearth, a child dreams of a dark bird that perches on the mantel and bends to whisper a name. She will tell it at daybreak. It will be remembered. And in the meeting house, a sermon continues that began long before these people were born, about covenants kept and broken, about wilderness and city, about a God who tests his people and a tempter whose tricks never run out. There is comfort in a story that has already named its villains. There is comfort in a map that shows the road out of trouble, even if it goes through a valley shadowed by gallows. The winter of 1692 offered maps and villains. It also offered hunger and cold, and the ordinary gravity of being alive among neighbors you do not entirely trust. We pause here, in the drift between kitchen and court, between child and magistrate, and we hold another question up to the candle's small flame. What if, instead of asking whether they were really witches, we asked what their world made visible to them, and what it hid? The afflicted learned to speak in a language their elders honored. The accused learned that innocence is not a shield when fear has built itself a cathedral. The clergy learned that the parchment boundaries of doctrine can flutter in the wind of human grief. The magistrates learned that a signature is a kind of weather, and once it changes, the season of a village changes with it. In the hush, after the day's examinations, the village listens to itself. Carts creak home. Starlight pins the night to the rooftops. Out by the edge of the woods, where the trees stand with their arms lifted in a congregation only they understand. A fox steps across old snow and leaves a new line of script. And so, in each house, the candle is snuffed, and the dark grows kind again. The questions do not go out. They settle like embers, ready to be blown to life tomorrow. A child stirs and murmurs. A woman dreams of warm islands and wakes with a taste of salt on her tongue. A minister looks again at the ledger and moves a number from one column to another. The world keeps happening despite the fear. If we listen closely, we can hear the girl's laughter from just a year ago, easy and unstudied, before winter pressed its claims. We can hear the minister's daughter reciting a psalm, the cousin echoing, a playful competition of memory. We can hear the kitchen woman humming a tune that belonged to her mother, and her mother's mother, long before ships changed the names of things. The same kitchen, the same hearth, the same bones in the walls, and yet a different weather now, a different sky. This is the way history lives, layered and present, like fingerprints on a pewter cup, like the faint ash in the bottom of a blackened pot. Tomorrow will bring a visit from a neighbor who is not a friend. Tomorrow will bring another fit in public, a gasp, and a point, and a name that hangs in the air like frost. Tomorrow will bring the scrape of a quill across paper, and the low-voiced counsel of men concerned for the town's soul. But tonight is only winter, and there is a thin moon, and the last pot has been set to soak, and the house creaks as houses do when the cold settles into their joints. Somewhere a cow shifts, somewhere a mother sighs against sleep, somewhere the girls whisper to each other in the dark, the quick pulse of children who have learned that their voices move the world. And so, in the hush, we leave them here, at the hinge of a story that has not yet taken its dreadful shape. The snow outside the door keeps its counsel. The stars show little faces and do not speak. The embers give out one last pop before settling to a low red hum. And if you look through the window, you will see only your own reflection looking back, and the question in your eyes will be the same question Salem held without an answer. What do we make real when we are afraid, and what do we refuse to see when the truth moves softly, like a hand through smoke? For now, rest. The road out of winter is long, and the next turning will bring us to the meeting house, where words become laws and laws shape lives. The kitchen grows quiet, and the night draws its shawl around the village, and the questions, like snow, keep falling. Chapter 2. The Meeting House of Unseen Things. The morning opens like a grey book, its pages damp with breath. Hoofprints stitch the lane. A crow arranges its black robes on a fence. The sky wears a shawl the colour of pewter. They come to the meeting house in slow threads of people, muffled in cloaks, mittens creaking with frost. Faces set in that careful Sabbath discipline, even on a weekday, because the business today is holy too, or so they have agreed. The door yawns. The room receives them. The benches remember every person who has ever sat down and tried to still a trembling heart. Here is the table for the magistrates, its edges worn soft by sleeves and hands. Here is the Bible, sleeping like a rock in a river. Here is the stove, slow to rouse, offering only a stingy measure of heat. The nails in the floor hold quiet counsel. The rafters listen with a long patience. A whisper zips, then stills just so. Does who speaks first matter? Who stands matters. Even the cough a man chooses to swallow or let fly can be a kind of vote. And so the first question of the day steps out, polite and unsmiling. What do we bring into a room when we walk in, and what do we leave outside? Some tuck away their doubts, like contraband in a boot. Some carry certainty openly, the way an officer might carry a sword, decorous, gleaming, and impossible to ignore. The afflicted are led to their place. Each face holds its own weather, a flinch of anticipation, a small hunger for attention, a startled seriousness, and a bowed determination to do what has been asked of them. The accused are brought in, and the room leans, almost imperceptibly, toward the story it wants to hear. A magistrate clears his throat, and his voice finds its proper key, grave but not theatrical. His words are a road, and the company steps upon it with a relief that surprises them. It is easier to walk a road than to keep circling a field looking for a path. Names are called, dates are recited. Relate what you have seen, child. The afflicted oblige, and their tales sprawl out like thread from a distaff. The spectre stood near the hearth. The spectre pressed its palm upon my chest. The spectre urged me to sign the book. The book, oh, the book. You can feel the room tremble at the mention, the way a sleeper shifts at the brush of a moth. It has no pages we can turn here, no spine we can place on the magistrate's table, and yet it is as present as the ledger by the clerk's hand, the devil's register, the list of those who have agreed to his covenant. It is an image that has gripped imaginations for years, carried in sermons like a hidden ember. And so we meet another question with our mittened hands outstretched to it, feeling for its temperature. What power does a picture have when it is drawn in a shared mind? The girls have learned to color it in. The men have learned to nod at its outlines. The book grows heavier with every mention, and yet not a single page can be produced. The accused answers. She does not carry the old words icily in her mouth. Some vowels own other seas than these, and some consonants come ashore with a grain of other soils still clinging to them. She lowers her eyes, because to look boldly is to invite the name brazen, and to look away is to appear false, and she must pick one, whether or the other, and walk through it. No, she says, no, I did not, I will not. I am God's, my baptism still waits my brow, though the water has long dried. Her denial is simple, but in a room so furnished with fears and furnished with precedent, simplicity can be mistaken for technique. The afflicted cry out. They start like fish, snagged by hooks. One coughs up a pin, or is it placed there by a neighbor's hand, a kindness that is also a cruelty. Another displays the purple bloom of a pinch. The court becomes a stage, not through anyone's wickedness, but through the physics of attention. Lines are delivered. Reactions follow with the tidiness of a script, and so the magistrate asks the next question in the only way such a question can be asked. If you be not guilty, why do these children suffer in your presence? To this, there is no answer anyone can give that will satisfy the weather in the room. It is the old riddle of fog and bell. The bell cannot prove its own sound once fog has swallowed it. She reaches for what she has: God's name, her faith, the ordinary facts of her days. I grind corn, she says. I mend. I fetch wood. I stir the stew and sing when I think no one listens. I have nothing but my hands and the strength in them. The magistrates listen. The clerk dips his quill. A man in the back lifts his chin slightly and then lowers it, like a man watching the sail of a ship that is not his to board. Spectral evidence, it pads into the room like a stray dog that has learned how to look hungry. It asks to be fed just a little, just enough to keep it from whining at the door. It is not that these men are fools. It is that they are living inside a story that grants the invisible a jurisdiction, and their learning is devoted to giving that jurisdiction careful bounds. They ask one another, sotto voce, where they have read this before. They have read it many places. They have read it in works by men whose names are respectable as pillars. If those pillars can brace a roof in London, why should they not brace one here? And yet, under the din of fits and objections, another current moves, thin as a rill beneath snow. A witness clears his throat and offers a detail that does not quite fit the favoured pattern. A neighbour's memory brings forward a moment of kindness from the accused, inconvenient to the architecture of maleficium. The clerk pauses, the quill tip hovering, and then writes it down anyway. Paper knows how to accept contradictions. It has always done so, trusting that the future will decide which scratches to trace and which to skim past. The examinations break and resume, like the winter light slipping behind clouds and emerging again. At noon, the village gulps cold air. The talk outside is less decorous. Fingers point. A woman says a name without lowering her voice. A man says another with careful softness, as if trying it on for fit. Two girls practice their fits around the corner and do not know that a pair of boys is watching, learning exactly which tremors call the quickest attention. Children are the best students of adult weather. They learn in minutes what it takes the grown to pretend they do not know. Back inside, a different accused stands in the front. This one has been poor longer than memory wants to admit. The word charity has worn grooves in her pride. She has borrowed too often, pleaded too bluntly, broken the rules of asking and thanking the better sort. The room's sympathy wavers like flame in a draught, and habit reaches for the easier conclusion. A hard life makes a hard heart. A hard heart makes a likely witch. No one says it so plainly, but the arithmetic has been scratched into the benches by years of use. And then there is confession. It arrives not as an avalanche but as a slow, collapsing drift. The tongue that offers it is tired of saying no in a chorus of disbelief. The mind that offers it has seen, in sleep and waking, every punished denial and every rewarded admission. The body that offers it is a body under threat of jail, of beating rumour, of an end no one wishes to name. So the confession takes the shape it believes the room will recognize. Circles in the forest, a small animal shaped by a familiar spirit, a mark upon the skin where a devil's kiss might be placed. The words come easier after the first, and the room, hungry for order, eats. With each bite, the world grows simpler. There is a chain of sin, a map of meetings, and a ladder of influence leading down. Yet even confession contains questions coiled into its heart. Who taught you these shapes? A magistrate asks. He wants the name above the name. And she, struggling to stay upright in the tide she has stepped into, offers what she can. Gestures, dreams, names heard in a moment of someone else's anger and stored like seeds. It is not the truth that makes the most elegant figure upon the page. It is the story that uses the fewest strokes of ink. The future will read this page and try to hear the tremor in her voice, but paper cannot hold tremors. It can only hold lines. The meeting house grows darker by inches. Tallow stings the air. The clerk flexes cold fingers. Evidence, evidence, what shall we call it when we cannot touch it? The magistrates, far from monstrous, are men of conscience, trapped in a trap they did not set alone. They want to draw fair circles, but their compass points wobble upon the work table, because the table itself is set upon a floor built over fear. And fear, like soft earth, shifts even under the careful foot. A mother in the crowd holds her child closer and thinks of herbs she has used in seasons past. Little charms she does not name that have kept a fever from climbing the ladder of a throat. A murmured scrap of a rhyme learned from her own mother's mother, who learned it across an ocean under a different moon. She will not speak of these now. She feels them curl into her apron, shy and guilty as cats in a thunderstorm. This is how a culture shrinks in on itself, one reticence at a time. What used to be called prudence becomes silence. What used to be called neighborly becomes dangerous. The old songs climb up into the rafters and will not come down. The afflicted, weary, and wired are offered bread and a cup. Some cannot swallow. Some eat with the avidness of children who know they are still children even as the room treats them like trumpets. One glimpses, just for a second, the face of the accused as a mother might see it, and feels a pang too complicated to name. She will smooth it away like a wrinkle in a sheet. She will return to the fit when called. But tonight, perhaps, she will dream of a kitchen where the air smells of cinnamon and soot, and a woman sings a soft island tune while she stirs. The clerk sands the ink to dry it. The magistrates pray as men do, when they are both devout and unsure, carefully, with good words that do not quite fill the hole they hope to fill. They dismiss the gathering. The door opens. The cold walks in and then escorts them out into itself. Boots creak. Voices gather and scatter. Somewhere in the jostle, a hand brushes another hand with a pressure that says, "I know," or perhaps, "I cannot say," or perhaps, "We are all inside the same winter, and it is deeper than we thought." That night, the village practices its separate rituals of thought. One man writes a letter he will not send to a cousin in a larger town, testing his sentences against the larger air beyond the pine woods. One woman opens her Bible and lets it fall to a page, and reads the first verse her eye touches, and decides it is an omen of mercy. A girl who trembled all day lies rigid in her bed, exhausted, listening for the sound of her own breath returning to an ordinary rhythm. A woman in a cell hums one note over and over until the stone wall receives it. The minister sharpens a quill and then does not use it. The sheriff counts keys by touch with the same care a farmer counts seed in a spring that will not come, and still the questions move like a tide under ice. When is attention a kind of food we come to crave without meaning to? When does fear choose the prettiest mask a doctrine's face, a law's stern brow, and how do we learn to lift it gently without tearing skin? If a court is a lantern, what oil keeps it from smoking the room black? If a village is a body, where is its pulse? And what happens when the pulse is taken with a hand that is shaking? The meeting house sleeps. The benches hold their breath. The ash in the stove remembers flame. On the table, the Bible lies beside the day's new pages. They do not speak to each other, but the moon through the small windows knows how to light them with equal kindness, and the frost writing on the glass draws its tender letters, and the night presses its ear to the village and listens. The way a mother listens to a child sleeping after fever, each turn, each sigh, noted, measured, forgiven. Tomorrow the road will turn again. There will be talk of jails and transports. There will be another neighbor brave enough to doubt out loud, and another drowned in louder zeal. There will be a meeting of ministers in a larger room, where language will be weighed like spice, and then, as always, spilled a little on the floor anyway. There will be men who think themselves pragmatic, and become, without knowing how, the stewards of a sorrow that will outlive them. There will be women who trade recipes at a doorway, and then fall silent when another steps into earshot. The way birds still themselves when a hawk's shadow passes. For now, the lane lies empty but for two sets of prints that wander and then meet and then wander again, as if the walkers could not decide whether to argue or to link arms against the cold. The pines rebutton their needles. The stars look the same as they did last winter, and yet we are not the same, and the village is not the same, And the old Bible and the new pages know this too, and say nothing, and hold their peace, and wait for a hand to open them in the morning. Sleep, then. The meeting house has taught us what rooms can do to truth, and what truth can do to rooms, and we will need the lesson when the courts awaken in earnest and the word trial learns how to carry both prayer and rope within a single syllable. Sleep, because the questions are not finished with us, and we will need our gentlest breath to ask them without breaking what is left unbroken. And in the hush, if you listen closely, you might hear an older song, one that predates all our fears, humming low through the timber and the nails, asking us to remember the common table where bread is simply bread, and the cup is simply the mercy it has always been. Chapter 3. The law learns the dark dawn, walks in on thin feet, and does not linger. The village rubs its eyes and ties its laces and steps onto a path that feels at once familiar and newly perilous, as if last night's frost has recast every rut as an omen. A cart rattles by with hoops and staves. A dog noses adrift and sneezes. Somewhere, a widow lays out her bread with the same old care, and yet her hands move as if measuring more than flour and salt, measuring the rumour that now lives like a permanent draft at her door. And so the law arrives, not with trumpet, but with parchment. A governor's ship, delayed by storms and business beyond the pines, has found its mooring. A commission is inked with steady strokes. New titles take their places beside old names. Oyer and terminer, the words say, to hear and to determine, to verbs dignified by centuries and seas, now set to work in a village where breath shows white in the air and the schoolmaster's slate squeaks in a corner room. The court's very syllables have an old-world weight to them. They ring against the clapboard walls and make the rafters answer in their dry voices. Men gather who have learned all their lives to look for order magistrates with quills, worthies with careful beards, ministers whose sermons have tamed tempers and also, sometimes, inflamed them. They are not villains. It would be easier if they were, but they are what history more often provides. Men trying to steer in a wind they partly understand and partly fear, using charts borrowed from other storms. The ink dries. The seal catches light. The room takes up its new name, court. And with the court comes a table, not quite like the meeting house table, this one squared for judgment, pruned of digression. The clerk sharpens new quills. The Bible sits within reach, the way a compass sits near a pilot's hand. The law unwraps its instruments. Testimony, examination, confession, precedent. Each is polished, each has its own shine, and yet there are hairline fractures one does not see until the light finds them at a certain angle. In this winter light, the fractures gleam. Outside snowmelt whispers in the ditches. Inside, a sheriff's boots scuffed the threshold, and a name is called. A woman whose house has already been searched steps forward in a silence that seems to thicken around her like wool. Her neighbors know her gait and the way she rolls a sore shoulder on cold mornings. Now they note how her hands knot and unknot like ropes. She denies again. She refuses again. She leans on the old words again, those words that have saved many a soul in other rooms. God is my witness. I have done no such thing. The afflicted oblige the court's question with their bodies. They stiffen and cry and bend like saplings in a sudden gust. It looks like proof, because pain always looks like proof, and sympathy, which is the court's human marrow, rises too. The judges do not enjoy this. They frown, they pray, they send a child outside until the fit subsides. They call the child back again because the court cannot hear what the court needs to hear without the child's trembling in the room. And under their brows, An argument they do not voice begins to pace. If the invisible world may strike at the visible, must not a visible court admit invisible signs? The syllogism sits politely at the table, and very few think to ask it for its papers. A minister is asked to speak, and he does what the learned do. He scales the room's distress with a ladder of citations. Europe has seen such things. Great divines have weighed such matters. An adversary prowls indeed, and vigilance is not panic. He cautions about spectral testimony with a softness that aims not to snap any thread that might be holding this assembly together. He calls for charity, which here means two things at once: generous judgment and a certain obedience to the wisdom that has come down through books and sermons. Two virtues braided together, and yet the braid tightens in ways no one quite measures until wrists feel the rope. The jail fills slowly, like a cellar with damp. The steps down echo with iron. The air has the smell of salt and straw and the scuffed leather of many shoes. Chains do not clang often. This is not a theatre of shackles. It is a theatre of waiting. Women mend their sleeves with bits of thread begged from a keeper's wife. A man prays with the blank determination of one rowing into a wind that does not change. A young girl practices a psalm under her breath, forgetting a verse and leaving the gap like a missing tooth in a song. The hours are long enough to carve new habits into the heart. Hope learns to whisper so it will not be overheard and taken away. In kitchens all over the village, the law's new shape leans against doorframes. A woman pauses with her ladle mid-air, thinking of an herb she once tied with red thread and hung above a cradle, kept secret because the best things are often turned to worst in the wrong light. A man who prides himself on plain dealing trims his tongue because the cousin of a cousin sits on the bench now, and a word can be mistaken for a dagger in certain weather. Boys reenact examinations with skipping bravado behind a barn and then fall silent when a shadow crosses. Girls study the adults' faces and learn which quiver invites a hand on the shoulder and which one invites a stern prayer. The first trials teach the court its hunger. A jury sits, a gallery listens, a clerk's hand keeps pace with breath and oath. One witness speaks of butter that would not come, no matter how long she churned, a detail so homely it carries a convincing weight, as if the devil himself had dipped a finger into the cream. Another mentions a sow found dead with no clear wound, and the word "no clear wound" slides in like a master key, opening every door. A third produces a poppet, pins bright as the eyes of mice. The court leans forward, the story holds. The verdict arrives like a thaw inevitable when it comes, and still, somehow, a shock when one sees water where there had been ice. Outside, the gallows timber stands like a new punctuation on the village's long sentence. It is not yet a word anyone can say easily, but the shape stands and does not need language to make its case. The law has found its sharpest edge, and the edge glints even when covered with a cloth. Those who doubt lower their voices. Those who believe square their shoulders. Those who hope for a quick end to all of this find themselves speaking briskly about the public good, as if briskness itself could make it so. On a different day, in a room with better light, a minister of another temper clears his throat and lofts a caution into the air where important men lean to hear it. He is not opposed to the hunt for wickedness, who would be, but he reminds them that a devil may borrow a face the way fog borrows a field, and to hang a body for the walking of a fog is a peril older than any new world. He speaks not in thunder but in measured rain. The men nod, they note the weather, they tuck the caution into their sleeves, the way a farmer tucks a sprig of something that might keep fever away. They do not throw it away. But in the courtroom, the wind still blows the other way. and a courtroom is a ship. Whatever wind fills its sails is the wind that sets its course. Confession multiplies again, as confessions do when they are fed. It is a sickle that cuts two ways, spares the throat that wields it for today, and gathers more names to lay tomorrow upon the table. The confessed begin to map their nights in figures that please their questioners. Sabbaths turned inside out, a book signed in a hand that trembled, a small thing that flew from a chimney like a moth, but burned like a coal when it touched the skin. They point upwards sometimes, because power always wants a taller ladder. If I met the devil in a clearing, did I meet him alone? Did I meet him with a woman higher in the town than I? The court's eyes climb where the finger points. The town breathes through its teeth. A new kind of cold moves under doors, and yet the record is not a single straight line across the page. Doubts run like hairline streams, thin but constant. A juryman goes home and sits long beside a sleeping child, looking at the loosened mouth of dreaming and wondering what misery he has just fastened in place with his name. A midwife remembers how many infants she has carried back across the dark border to breathe and thinks, if the devil wished to have me, he has had many chances. A farmer on a far edge of the parish mutters that his cows calved late every third year long before this trouble, and if Satan is to be charged for all the cycles of a stubborn earth, the docket will never end. When the first death sentence is read, the paper does not tremble, but the hands that hold it do. The sheriff practices his voice until it does not crack. The condemned says little, because what is there to say when the room's weather cannot be changed by weather from the heart? She prays the prayers she has always known. She asks that her children be kept in bread and wisdom. She steps into a cart and does not look for the face that might soften and betray itself. What any village learns in such a season is that everyone has a face he keeps for winter set, wind-ready, and uninformative as bark. The day of the hanging is like any other day, which is the worst of it. A barley field stirs. A dog sleeps on a stoop. Someone mends a harness with a neat stitch, and in the place set aside, boards creak. A rope darkens in a spot where many hands have handled it. The law, having learned its dark lesson, recites it without a stumble. There are fewer words than one would expect. There usually are when the machinery is well-oiled. The circle tightens. The world holds its breath for the length of a prayer, and then exhales into a silence the court takes for satisfaction, and the mothers take for a long, unanswerable ache. Afterward, even the wind seems to walk softly for a while. The village keeps its eyes down. Children whisper questions at night and are told sleep, God sees, God knows, it will be over soon. But soon is a word that loses its meaning when the court's appetite is still keen, and new names arrive with the morning like chores. If fear were a loom, what a bolt of cloth it would make, long enough to dress the whole town in the same stiff garment. In a parsonage miles off, a father and a son argue in ink rather than in shouts, as is their habit. The elder writes with a winter's patience and a summer's caution, the younger with a zeal that can cut fruit and finger both. They agree on the shape of the invisible and quarrel about the uses of sight. They mean to save a town from ruin. They do not intend any rope, and yet their pages, once they slide into other hands, acquire lives of their own, as words always do when they march from study to scaffold. It has always been the risk of sentences. They walk out into the world and find work we never meant for them. Nights deepen. The jail air grows ranker. The season tips toward heat and insects, and the particular fatigue that summer lays on shoulders already bent by worry. A woman recants a confession, and then says the old words again under new pressure. A man learns that he cannot save his wife with his honor alone. A child who has been strong in daylight weeps into the pillow she shares with two others, thin weeping, careful so as not to wake the next cell. The court adjourns, consults, and resumes. The governor, who has many affairs to tend, hears a drift of alarm from men whose names carry farther than pines. He nods gravely. He asks for copies. He promises deliberation. Beneath all this, the village's ordinary goodness stubbornly persists. As goodness does, a neighbor leaves a jug of milk at the door of a house where the man has been taken. Two boys split a found honeycomb with the solemn fairness only boys can manage. A woman presses a sprig of something sweet into the palm of a prisoner's sister and says nothing. The small kindnesses do not undo the rope, but they keep a little light alive, and when a season changes, light will need somewhere to land. The court's great questions have not changed. What may we count as proof? How far may fear extend the hand of law? When does caution become cruelty but their edges have grown sharp? And bloodless answers no longer satisfy. Even those most certain feel like grit between teeth, the knowledge that their certainty sits in a human mouth. The law has learned the dark almost by accident, and now the unlearning will take a different courage altogether, one that moves more slowly than zeal and stands its ground more quietly than fear. For tonight the village draws its shutters and lets the insects thrum on the other side of the wood. The Bible lies open on a table in one house, closed in another, face down in a third, as if the weight of its covers could hold down the wind. A judge dreams of a field where the furrows refuse to run straight, no matter how he sets his plough. A minister dreams of a book with pages made of smoke. A child, too tired to tremble, sleeps like a spilled cup. And above them all, stars practice their patient arithmetic, keeping the sums none of us can do. We will come because we must, to the days when doubt steps forward, not as a whisper but as a voice the court can hear. We will walk the road that leads from scaffold to sorrow to apology, from apology to a silence that is no apology at all, and then to the fragile, necessary words that finally find their way onto paper. But not yet. Not while the rope is still warm and the ink on a new warrant has not dried. Not while the law is still tasting the power it did not think it wanted and has not yet learned to refuse. Rest now. The questions keep their vigil as they always do, pacing the thresholds between houses and hearts. The court sleeps, the jail breathes, the fields murmur their old names to the dark. In the hush, a mother tells herself a story that ends well and chooses to believe it until morning. In the hush, a magistrate wakes and cannot remember for a moment whether he is the shepherd or the wolf. In the hush, the village turns its face to the wall and waits for a wind to change. Chapter 4. Doubt finds a door. Summer leans against the village with a warm, relentless shoulder. Bees worry the clover. Laundry claps its damp applause on a line. The air smells of cut hay and iron. The law's work goes on, tireless and tidy, as if habit itself has put on a black robe. Yet even in this close weather, a different wind begins to wander the lanes, a wind of small questions that find one another the way fireflies do at dusk, blinking, pausing, blinking again, until a field that seemed empty is quietly lit. A woman of good report stands accused, and the room rearranges itself around her like people sidling aside for a cart piled high with glass. She walks as those who have long practiced steadiness walk. She answers without embroidery. Her neighbors come with their pens and their plain words. She has been industrious, patient, God-fearing. She has kept her house not only in order but in charity. Petitions collect signatures like dew on a cool morning. Names flower in neat rows down the page, each a small courage, each a wager that truth can still be taught its proper shape. The court listens, because it means to be just, but the afflicted are deft musicians now, and their bodies play the room with an orchestra's sense of timing. A hand jerks at the hinge of a name, a cry lifts when a denial lands. The petition looks sturdy as a fence until the first tremor rattles it. Then the surrounding air begins to hum again with old certainties. In so short a season, the village has learned how to stand inside a paradox. That virtue may be an argument for guilt if the devil loves a cunning disguise. When a man once held up as an example, strong of arm, strong of scripture, takes the cart to the place where the hill looks over the town, all the careful balances flex and shake. He has been described as the very sort of pillar that keeps a meeting house roof from sagging. He climbs the scaffold with a calm that feels like a hand on the shoulder of those below. He speaks the Lord's Prayer without stumbling, and for a breath the world sways on its post, because they have always been told that such words will choke in a witch's throat. The court regains its footing. The rope does its simple work. The hill gives back the silence that follows. But the jolt has travelled. A juryman goes home and tries to recite the prayer himself and trips, and it means nothing and everything at once. A minister sits long in his chair after supper and turns a page and turns it back and looks out the window until the dark makes his reflection the only page. A child hears the older boys repeat the story with a hush usually reserved for thunder, and falls asleep with the prayer moving through her as a slow current under stone. Elsewhere, another lesson walks the road in plain boots, that a doubt held privately cannot prevent a public harm. A husband pleads, his voice unadorned, for the mind the town once admired in his wife. He lists her kindnesses like a man counting seeds and knowing a frost is coming. He cannot barter with what the court wants, because the court wants a shape his house does not contain. He learns, as many learn in such seasons, that righteousness and result do not share a door, the ministers, to divide along a seam that had always been there, fine as a hair in glass. One writes with ardour in his letters and journals, steadying the court when wind rocks it, urging zeal without frenzy, caution without paralysis. Another, older, steps forward in another room and lifts the same caution higher more than a courtesy. Something like a creed, better that suspects should slip free than that one innocent hang under a cloud of ghostly proofs. He does not thunder, he states. The sentence enters the season like a cool hand to a fevered brow. It does not cure the sickness, but those who receive it remember the relief. This is how a turn begins, not with a shout, but with small rearrangements inside quiet hearts. A sheriff pauses at the bottom of the jail stairs and speaks more softly than yesterday. A keeper's wife lingers longer with the bread, palm resting a second on the back of a woman's hand. A boy who once mimicked a fit in the barn avoids his own eyes in a tin reflection. A magistrate sleeps badly. The governor, who has been weighing papers that travel by dusty road and slow river, reads yet another letter where reverend men lay their careful worry down in lines. He begins to think of doorways, which to close without crushing witch fingers. Autumn reaches for the rim of the fields with its copper fingers. The insect's anthem changes key. The court, so sure of its steps, finds the earth beneath them uneven. The governor speaks at last with the authority that can push a season one way or another. He will not have a court whose measures are the breadth of children and the nighttime pictures of their fear. He draws a line where the line should have been at the start and says, without heat but with finality, that such evidence is not to govern the gallows. The room that hears this breathes as if a window has at last been unlatched. Not all breathe gladly. Some feel robbed of the only tools they learned to trust in the dark. Some feel the order of the world wobble and clutch at the table's edge. But others, many others, find that their hands stop shaking for the first time since winter. They look at one another in ways they had not dared. Openly, as if human faces might again be read, not for signs of a hidden pact, but for weariness and hunger and hope. Prison remains. Cold remains. Warrants do not turn to leaves and crumble. But the weather has shifted, and once the wind changes, men must brace differently. A new court is named for a new year. The rules are not the same. Spectres are made to sit outside like dogs, not allowed at the table. The questions become less vague and more nail and wood. Who saw what with waking eyes? Who touched what with living hands? Who heard what from a mouth they can swear to without looking over a shoulder for the devil's smile? One by one, cases thin like broth, stretched too far, and what looked like a feast of proofs proves to be a table set with shadows. Some are freed. Some wait, hours turning to knots in the rope of their days. Families count coins and sell a field's edge to pay the fees that jails call their due. People who had spoken too quickly learn the discipline of a quieter tongue. And a new kind of prayer is prayed across the parish, not for victory in a war with an unseen soldier, but for wisdom and mending and an end to a winter that lasted even under summer heat. In one parsonage, the minister who had stood firm beside the hunt feels a tremor in the ladder he climbed. The tremor has its own name on it now, brought to him like a bitter cup. His wife has been spoken of in the same tone he taught others to take seriously. He feels in an instant the distance between theory and blood. He feels, with equal sharpness, the rightness of the governor's new measure and the wrongness of the path that led to this corner. He writes, years later, with a hand that has learned humility, and sets his name among those who admit the harm, and weeps in a way ink cannot carry. Another, younger still, will write a narrative that keeps the town in a glass jar, labeling, preserving, meaning to explain. The jar does a kind of work. It also makes a kind of museum, where living sorrow dries into something tidy. The older minister's simpler maxim, carried by mouths more than by print, does a peasant's work in the soil, turning clods and loosening roots, and making it harder for the next season of fear to take such easy hold. If you walk, in imagination, through the village now, you will see the change, not as a banner, but as an unfastening. The whispers have lost their script. The children's games drift back toward the lawful mischief of times before, berry-stained lips, knees green with grass, a daisy chain tugged apart by a brother's quick fingers. Doors that stayed on the latch during the talk now crack wide again when a neighbor knocks. A woman brings her herbs out of the chest and sets them once more by the window, where the sun remembers their names. Loss does not lift. The hill keeps its terrible arithmetic. The graves bear the weight of certainty turned to ash. But among the living, a texture returns that had gone thin. The feel of difference endured rather than punished. The feel of someone else's oddity being merely that, and not an omen. The feel of the Bible resuming its gentler occupations, comfort, rebuke, song after a season of being used like a blade. The court, in its new shape, finds its way to verdicts that end at last, not in rope, but in release. A woman walks out into air that feels as if it has been washed, though it is only the same old air with the door propped open. She looks older than the gate remembers, and younger than sorrow expected. A man learns his field again by the weight of the soil in his hands, and does. not stop now to wonder whether the devil has been meddling in his furrows. Weather and work and the stubbornness of seeds reclaim their rightful throne. A child who once trembled finds that her body, tired of being an instrument, wants to be a body again, wants to run, to drowse in a patch of sun, to learn to stitch even ordinary lines. And yet the questions do not quit their patient labor. They have only changed rooms. They live now in letters of apology drafted slowly and in public notices that do not know how to say the word wrong without choking on it. They live in petitions for compensation, in the pinch and release of coins that cannot replace a woman's voice at the table or a father's hand on a child's sleeve. They live in the moment when a judge's signature, once a hammer, becomes a hand reaching across a gulf it helped to open. Some nights, a mother stands at her door with her shawl pulled close and looks up at the same stars that watched everything. She counts the months the way women count, by harvests, by the sizes of children's shoes, by the winter hard and spring soft of her own hands. She tells herself the story differently now. Less devil, more hunger, less pact, more grief, less books signed in blood, more papers signed in haste. She lets the truth bevel itself, softer at the edges, not to excuse, but to keep what is left from cutting everyone all the time. In the meeting house, the benches hold new sermons easily. The stove, when fed, gives the same generous heat. The nails go on doing what nails have always done, untroubled by the alarms that sent men to their drawers for quills. The Bible grows heavy again with its usual burdens and blessings. If a child asks a hard question, a minister now more readily says the plainer answer. We were afraid, we were wrong, we must learn. The words do not break anything, they mend. Beyond the pines, the larger world grinds on with its own concerns, wars, treaties, rumors of portents. Yet Salem carries in its small chest a compact wisdom the size of a coin worn smooth by many fingers. That fear, once enthroned, loves the dignity of law. That law, once enlisted, can forget whom it serves. That courage sometimes looks like a window opened, a rule restrained, a silence broken by a simple, stubborn no. The village does not say it so beautifully. It lives in small practices, listening longer, signing slower, asking for 2 witnesses where once one would do, and measuring stories by daylight as well as by candle flame. When the first snows return, they fall on a town that is still itself, and is also altered in ways only the old can see at a glance. Footprints braid the lanes, just as before. Smoke goes up. Bells call the Sabbath. But the people inside the coats and scarves carry a new muscle in the heart. A small strength grown from the work of doubt, not the doubt that sinks and hides, but the kind that climbs a few steps up the meeting house stair and clears its throat in a voice that trembles and then steadies. A father kneels at a grave that holds a name it should not hold and says a prayer with no ornament. A magistrate visiting a cousin in another town speaks less briskly than the last time, and when he says the word evidence, he sets it down as if it might break. A girl who watched and imitated and learned, because children must, learns now a different lesson from the faces around her, that attention need not be paid with the coin of someone else's ruin. And if you walk back, in thought, to that kitchen where flour once dusted the air like pale weather, you may find it warmer again, busy with winter's chores. A pot sings its low song. A hand draws a sign in steam on a window, not a charm, not a curse, only a small picture to make a younger child laugh. A story is told, softer and less sharp, about islands and ships and a mother's songs. The story ends not with a gasp, but with a smile that folds neatly into the night. We will come because every tale is honest only when it finishes to apologies set in ink, to confessions of error, to the names read aloud with a tenderness that does not undo the harm but refuses to forget it. We will come to a woman who, years hence, finds the courage to name her part in the beginning and to call it what it was, a grievous wrong carried by a child and by those who made her burden a banner. We will come to the long, slow work by which a town writes itself back toward mercy. For now, let the wind from the north clean the lanes. Let the candles burn low. Let the night hold the houses the way a hand holds a bird's small heart, careful, neither gripping nor letting go. Doubt has found a door, and through it comes not chaos, but a steadier kind of quiet. Sleep beside that quiet, dear listener, and we will follow it to its end, where hard words are spoken with gentleness, and the questions, though never fully answered, are at last fully heard. Chapter 5. Names led back into light. Frost sketches its fine script on window glass again, as if the season itself has taken up a quill to write what people cannot quite say. The village moves in quieter shapes now. The courts have changed their instruments. The jail doors open more often than they close. The gallows stands like an old tool hung on a peg, no longer in use, but not yet taken down. There is a new work at hand, and it is work that requires a different strength, the kind that stoops, that counts, that admits, the kind that learns to say we were wrong without teaching the words to sound like thunder. Men gather at tables that once hosted fiercer debates, and read aloud petitions whose fibers still remember the hands that made the paper. A widow sets before them, with calm precision, the cost of a winter spent without her husband's hands, the field left ragged, the roof that leaked in 2 corners, the cow sold dear to pay for jailer's fees. Another woman speaks of the children she has moved across the months like pawns, trying to shelter each one when the wind turned. There is no poetry in her sentence, only inventory, exact and sorrowed, like a ledger kept by someone who never wanted to be a merchant. The men listen. Some are the same men who listened before, and their listening now is different. They ask fewer questions with sharp edges. They ask for dates, for names, for sums, for proof that can be touched. They set down figures, ink drying to a dull shine. There is, in this business, a relief that lives beside the ache, relief in the tangible coins, parcels, the clean arithmetic of compensation after so many months spent in the foggier exchange of spectres and signs. Yet each coin, when it lands, rings with a small hollowness. The sound says what everyone knows. Money can mend the roof and fill the cupboard, but it cannot rewind the world to the morning before the rope. No one expects it to. But people must live, and living asks for bread more often than it asks for philosophy. And so the coins travel in small sacks, and the names of those to whom they go are copied carefully, because if the world intends to remember its harm, it must also remember the measure it made toward repair. In a parsonage, where the light falls like a patient hand across a desk, a minister takes up his own pen and wears his humility like a garment he has had to tailor himself. He has weathered, in private, the strange wound of hearing his wife's name in a mouth not hers. He has watched a tide that once lifted his words recede and leave the pebbles of their after-use showing plainly. He writes to say, "We helped to turn the wheel that was crushed." He writes to say, "Forgive." The sentences look simple on the page, but they have gone a long way in the heart before they arrive where ink can fix them. Farther down the lane, in a house dealt smaller cards by life, a woman sits with her daughter and chooses the shape of her memory. She places before the girl a story where fear learned to walk around in Sunday clothes and was welcomed into parlors. She says the names of those lost, as if she is laying loaves on a table, each set down with 2 hands, each a gift and a debt. The child listens, her eyes steady, and learns the peculiar discipline of grief that does not boil over but does not go cold. The lesson will serve her, the lesson will cost her, the lesson will keep the town from forgetting too quickly. And then there is the girl who, in the earliest winter, bore more weight than any child should. She has grown over the months into a taller self. She has learned the inward ribs of her remorse. Her sleep is uneven. Her days are a braid of ordinary and unbearable. She stands some Sundays with the congregation and feels her lungs work with everyone else's, and wonders if such a mechanical mercy can absolve a more intimate failing. In time, she will climb the few steps to the front of a meeting house and speak in a voice that learned how to tremble and then learned how not to. She will name her part. She will say the words that lift a portion of air from the room. I lied, or if not lied, then aided a lie. I was a child. I was not alone. I am sorry. The town will hold its breath in a silence that is not accusation and not absolution, but something like the posture of prayer when the prayer has run out of syllables. Those who hear her will carry the sound of it home in their sleeves. Some will weep in kitchens where onions have taught them how to weep without explanation. Some will tell the story to their sons and daughters like a cautionary tale cut so close to the bone that it becomes a principle. Some will turn their faces from windows that show them the hill and wash a dish and rinse it twice. Not because it needs rinsing, but because the hands need work that ends. The law, meanwhile, does what law can when it seeks to mend. A proclamation names those whose convictions will be reversed. A year's work is framed like a fence around a field that had been left open. The papers read in Boston carry the news outward along roads that remember heavier tidings. There are lists, names ordered as if the alphabet might shield them. There are sums marked beside the names. There are signatures, some from hands that shook, some from hands that had learned stillness from long practice. The lists will lengthen, even years and generations hence, as if the act of leading names back into light is itself a ritual that must be repeated to stay true. The hill does not move. Snow comes and goes upon it. Grass covers what grass always covers. Children dare one another to run a certain distance and run back, because children are always measuring the borders of fear. Lovers stand with their foreheads touching and say nothing until their breath makes a single cloud. A woman in an old shawl, old because she keeps it, not because she cannot replace it, pauses there and speaks 3 names aloud, and then speaks them again, and then says Amen without knowing exactly to whom she said it. The hill becomes, by this slow practice, less a court's punctuation and more a town's psalm. Elsewhere, in houses nearer the harbour where news rides quicker on salt air, people who watched from safe distances take up the tale and feel in it a familiar throb, the ache of having been certain and being called now to be less so. A printer sets type for a reflection written by a man who watched and wrote and meant to save and did not. Another printer sets type for a sermon that will survive longer than the paper on which it travels, not because it is perfect, but because its caution rings true in the ear that has learned to distrust a chorus. Across counties, across colonies, new rooms hear the tale the way a neighbour hears the oldest story at a wake, already known and newly piercing. In Salem's lanes, the ordinary returns as quietly as a bird to a hedge after a hawk's shadow. A woman hangs lavender in a window again, not to ward, but to scent. An old man hums while he mends a net, and does not flinch when a child shouts behind him. A midwife walks at night with her basket, and is not watched as if she carried a salamander under her apron. The villager's courage learns a new face, the face that looks at oddity and chooses not to name it evil, the face that greets difference and calls it neighbor rather than omen. The Bible returns to its many labors without being asked to prove the invisible in court. It becomes, again, a book that mothers lay open for comfort, that fathers bring to the table, like bread that children learn by ear before they can read. The ministers older, sobered, fatten their sermons with mercy, thicken them with the history only they can tell, and thin them where zeal once made a broth too rich for everyday use. They preach against the devil still, because the devil is one of the ways we talk about what is crooked in us and around us. But they preach more about the ways we might build rooms that do not bend so readily to fear. When winter loosens again and the river glides like a thought freed of its worry, a procession passes down a lane with a dignity that does not need trumpets. There is no banner. There is paper. There is a voice reading, halting only where a name asks for breath. Families stand at doorways to hear their dead lead, syllable by syllable, back toward honor. The words strike and warm like small flints. No miracle happens. Bread still needs kneading. Roofs still want mending. But something unseen, something the law cannot measure, edges closer to right. Years will pass. A child who learned her letters, tracing the tall loops of those apology papers, will grow to teach her own children a caution against hurry, a habit of second hearing. A lad who once played at fits will one day hold a town office and set, with unremarkable care, the rule that two witnesses must agree where once one imagination could do. The hill will hold its counsel. The benches in the meeting house will grow smooth under a generation of more measured listening. And across the centuries, readers will come, candles in hand, first tallow, then whale oil, then the cold light of other ages, and lean over the records with their scooters of sorrow and curiosity. They will find, in the cramped letters of the clerk, the bones of a storm. They will find, in the later lists and proclamations, the slow untying. Some will make plays of it. Some will write heavy histories. Some will walk the lanes with maps printed by a gift shop, and think of the questions that winter casts like long branches over every door. They will stand on the hill and hear traffic instead of crows, and yet the air will carry the old hush if they are quiet enough, and if the day is willing. Back in the village that began this tale, night comes early or late, according to the month, but always comes. Lamps bloom along tables where bread sits and knives glint. A mother strokes a child's brow and feels only the heat of living, not the fever of a story gone wrong. A man washing his hands after a day with the last of the harvest looks into the basin and sees only water, not omens. The quiet that returns is not the old quiet. It is a quiet taught by noise, a calm that remembers the storm. It is stronger for remembering. And if you find yourself, dear listener, once more at that first kitchen where the girls whispered and the stories curled with the steam, you will notice how the room has gathered itself. The mixing bowl bears a faint line where a crack was mended with care. The spoon is worn to an oval that knows the hand that uses it. The storyteller, older now and stubborn in her gentleness, sings a tune that belongs to no book and every hearth. The girls, women, now watch a younger child hop on one foot to her own ticking game, and they smile, a private smile that includes the past, forgives where it can, and keeps a vigilant kindness where it cannot. The town will never manufacture a perfect sentence to wrap around what happened. Instead, it will practice a grammar of deeds, slower signatures, wider hearing, doors unlatched for sunlight and neighbor talk, and a refusal to let fear rent a room at the courthouse again without much stricter terms. Apologies will be read at anniversaries. Stones will bear the names. A schoolchild will copy them, and the copying will carry something of the old weight forward in a way that does not crush. Outside, frost brightens the stubble in the fields. Upstairs, someone turns in sleep, and the bedstead creaks, a small, homely sound that means the building holds. Somewhere, an older minister sits with his hands folded in the warm pocket between lamp and Bible and breathes a long breath that ends almost without his noticing, in a prayer so plain it barely rises to the name. Keep us from ourselves when we are most certain. Bring us back when we have wandered. Teach us to count rightly. Tomorrow will bring work as it always does. Mending harness, splitting kindling, arguing gently over where to set the boundary fence, tallying the past for the sake of the future. The questions that began in winter have not vanished. They have found better rooms. They have learned from a better company. And in those rooms, at those tables, people sit with open hands and try again to hold truth without squeezing it into the shapes fear prefers. Sleep now. The names have started their long return from shadow to syllable, from document to doorway, from stone to story told with tenderness. We will follow them once more in the quiet of one last chapter to the place where the tale sits down and rests, and where the night, remembered and forgiven as far as a world can manage such work, waits to be told good night. Chapter 6. The questions learn our names. Morning rises with a gentleness learned from many winters. Frost loosens its hold on the hedges and becomes the familiar damp of daybreak. The village moves in its old choreography, pails at the well, boots by the door, a child carrying kindling with both arms and a proud, careful face. Nothing looks extraordinary, and that is the miracle. After storms, the ordinary is the shore we swim toward. Were they really witches? The question travels the lane as softly as breath in cold air. It has travelled for years, in sermons and quiet talks, in letters folded neatly and kept in boxes, in the minds of boys who have grown into men and found themselves at tables where the town's rules are mended. The question sits at kitchen tables beside bread and salt. It stands at graves where the grass now lies level. It lingers in the meeting house rafters like a note that outlasts the choir. The question has been patient. It has waited until the rooms could bear its weight. There is an answer now, but it is not the kind that slams doors. It is an answer that opens them. No, they were not witches. They were wives and daughters, husbands and sons, midwives who knew the pulse at a wrist, farmers who knew the stubbornness of weather, women whose tongues were sharp because their lives demanded edge, men whose pride was old as their fields, a girl who wanted to be seen with a brightness that turned on her and everyone around her. They were people, and the work of people, fear, anger, hunger, grief, envy, hope took on the masks their doctrine had ready for it. And those masks walked into courtrooms and were treated as faces. But the question Salem could not answer was never only that one. It was a handful of questions, each with its own chill. What counts as proof when the thing we fear cannot be weighed? Who owns a story once it has been told aloud? What happens to a mind that stands too near the mouth of a crowd? When does a book become a blade in a careful hand? How far can care travel before it turns, tight and bright, into cruelty convinced of its own mercy? The village learned answers by living them. The court's rules changed not because a trumpet sounded, but because a human face, beloved, familiar, was pointed at by the same logic that had felled strangers. The governor read letters that held their voices steady and looked past the smoke for flame. Ministers who had been certain found themselves less so. Ministers who had been cautious found the courage to be plain. The meeting house remembered how to be a school for humility. The jail remembered how to be a warning instead of a mill. Compensation followed with the sound of coins and paper, but the deeper wages were paid in speech. A young woman lifted her head and apologized in a voice that had learned honesty by walking through its lack. Men who had signed too quickly signed again, this time to admit a kind of daylight they had once shaded. An older minister, the one whose soft caution would turn to granite in the memory of a town, laid down a sentence so simple it became a lantern. Better that 10 suspected escape than that one innocent be condemned. Such lamps do not end storms. They mark the road home. Years folded over the village like blankets, each one thinner as the bed wore on. The gallows timber weathered back into the hill's grammar. Names that had been spoken as charges were spoken as prayers. Children who once learned their letters by copying indictments learned them again by copying apologies, and found, in the new script, a dignity that did not require ropes. Herbs returned to windowsills with the peace of things that no longer need to hide. In kitchens, the old stories learned new endings, no longer sharp hooks for fear, but gentler arcs toward wonder. We walk the lanes in thought and see how time settles what fury cannot. At the edge of the wood, the path that once felt like a ribbon pulled too tight across the throat of the town loosens into a simple track trodden by hunters, by lovers with hands tucked in sleeves, by children carrying baskets of mushrooms and laughter. At the meeting house, a child's question interrupts a sermon, and the minister, older now, smiles with a patience he had to grow, and answers not with thunder but with light. We were afraid, and fear is clever, and this is how we try not to be fooled again. Across a continent that does not yet know its name, other rooms repeat pieces of the lesson. In one town, a rumor paws at a door and is turned away because a rule says it must be weighed in daylight. In another, a woman's oddness is endured, and then cherished, because a man remembers what happens when oddness is made into omen. A clerk in a small court in a colder county pauses with his pen above a line and decides to ask for 2 witnesses, not one, and does not know that he is repeating Salem's better part. The guardrails become habits. The habits become culture. The culture holds when the wind leans hard, and yet the lesson wants keeping. Every generation must apprentice itself to doubt's gentler craft. We are never finished with the work of asking for proof that can stand with its face in the sun. We are never finished with the work of softening the place where certainty grips the handle of power. The devil's book has left the courtroom, but human fear still owns a fine calligrapher's hand. It will return with new inks and fresher pages if the town forgets to keep watch for it, not in forests or in the sky, but in its own sentences. Walk again, dear listener, to the kitchen where the first snow held its breath. The bowl's mended crack gleams faintly in morning light. A kettle murmurs with the comfort of things that ask nothing beyond fuel and time. The storyteller, older, steadfast, lets a tune fall into the room like a shawl, and then begins another story. One that speaks of islands and voyages, of a God who is not smaller than fear, of the way a child's imagination can be a garden or a conflagration depending on the weather we build around it. The younger woman who once trembled listens with an attention that has learned to be a blessing instead of a blade. The hill waits, as hills do, with the patience of ground. A couple stands close and reads the names carved in stone, and then, at the bottom of the list, finds a plaque where the town speaks its contrition again in metal that will weather but not quickly. The couple does not speak. The air does the speaking. The wind says, "Remember." The light says, "Forgive." The stone says, "Do not call this finished." And the grass, good grass, says only what grass always says, that roots matter, that a cut heals, that a field is a summa of every season it has known. In homes lit now by candles more often than by fire, people tell the tale without dressing it in spectacle. They let the smaller facts do their noble work. Who fetched water for whom? Who brought bread? Who signed? Who could not sign and pressed a cross instead? Who changed a mind before the world noticed? The tale travels outward in quieter tones, and because it is quiet, it can be heard. Children hear it and ask good ordinary questions. Adults answer without reaching for thunder. The rooms themselves seem to breathe easier after such talk, as if the walls have learned that truth does not require heavy weather to make itself known. Were they really witches? No. But that answer does not use the past only to feel superior. It uses the past to teach the hands how to be steady when the next fever comes by another name. It puts a test in the town's pocket. Ask again, weigh twice, and open a window. It keeps the minister's caution folded like a letter to be read at need. It keeps the governor's line at the ready. It keeps the girl's apology alive, not to bruise her forever, but to remember how difficult and necessary remorse can be when it tries to stand in public. The present always arrives with its own masks. A winter of rumors can come without snow. A crowd can assemble inside a paragraph. A courtroom can be a street, a tavern, a page, a pulpit, a marketplace where the same old currency is traded under new names. Certainty, spectacle, outrage dressed as virtue. A village wise in the Salem way will light its lamps and make room for patience. It will ask whether its proof could live outdoors. It will prefer the slow dignity of repair to the fast satisfaction of blame. It will choose the shame of admitting error over the sin of persisting in a lie. So the story ends not by closing its covers, but by handing them to us. We become the last leaf, the one that insists the branch is still alive after all the weather it has taken. We choose, as townsfolk did, to keep the better rules on the table in reach, and to put the worse on high shelves where mice and time can have them. We teach our children the shape of a sentence that saved lives. I do not know yet. Let us wait for light. We teach them the shape of another. I was wrong, I am sorry. We make these phrases a seam through which generations can pass without tearing. Night returns, because night always does, and the lanes drink it down like water after work. Windows warm to squares of honey. Door latches lift and settle. Across the road from the meeting house, a woman pauses to look back one last time before she goes inside. She sees the simple box of the building, the humble slope of its roof, the smallness of the door that once admitted so much fear and now receives quieter feet. She feels a lifting in her chest that does not need a name. Inside, her eldest waits with a psalm half learned, eyes bright with the satisfaction of almost knowing. We have walked, you and I, through winter kitchens and summer courts, through jails where straw remembered the weight of sleeping sorrow, through rooms where words made weather and weather made law. We have watched doubt learn to speak without sneer, and courage learn the plain face of restraint. We have carried names uphill and walked them back down again. We have listened for the questions that never learned how to end and discovered they do not want answers so much as guardians people willing to keep them in good air, to hold them where they can do their clarifying work without being turned into tools. Lay down now the lantern of attention. Let the rooms darken to their kind, safe blue. Let the hill keep its watch without our eyes on it. Let the kitchen cool and the kettle breathe. The meeting house will be there tomorrow. The benches keeping the marks of the people who sat and softened and changed. The papers will remain in their boxes, inked witness to error and repair. The story will stay among the houses like a careful neighbor, present, helpful, modest. If ever the wind rises in that old way, if ever the masks appear with new paint, the town will hear a remembered voice and answer it with a steadier one. And if any child should ask you, years from now, whether they were really witches, you can say the truth and then say more. You can place a hand on the wood of a table and say, This is what we call real bread and breath, and the habit of waiting for the sun. And then, as the child listens, you can whisper the larger truth, how fear draws faces on fog, how law must learn to look only at the prints that feet leave on the earth, how mercy keeps a ledger too, always in the black when we choose it. Sleep, dear listener. The tale has done its honest work. It has set the questions down where morning can find them. The village lies quiet under a sky that seems to understand at last what roofs are for. The last candle dwindles to a small gold thought. The fields outside hold their frost like an old lesson held lightly. In this hush, let the story fold itself and settle, and let your breathing find the slow river it loves. And so the night falls quiet, carrying their whispers into silence. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss another whisper in the night. Until we meet again, good night.